in the frozen grip of winter in 1206, as the Mongol tribes gathered near the icy banks of the Sirlan River, they declared a once obscure warrior named Genghis Khan as their supreme leader. Yet it wasn't the precision of his archers or the speed of his cavalry that would reshape the world. It was his merciless genius for psychological warfare. Like the ancient strategist Sun Tzu once claimed, "The greatest victory is that which requires no battle." Genghis Khan didn't just understand this, he lived it. From the very beginning, his strategy focused not merely on crushing his enemies, but on breaking them before the first arrow flew. He united the warring clans of the steppes by force, yes, but also by fear. One of his earliest victims was Turgal, his childhood blood brother, whose loyalty had grown questionable. Genghis didn't just kill him, he obliterated every memory of him. His enemies understood the cost of resistance was a year. By 1219, when he turned his fury toward the mighty city of Dorashan, the Mongols executed a masterstroke of terror. Survivors were allowed encouraged to escape. These trembling souls fled north, carrying tales of burning temples, screaming scholars, and streets paved with blood. Refugees were no longer just collateral, they were weapons of mass intimidation. This tactic reached horrifying perfection in the siege of Batrak. As Mongol banners appeared on the horizon, 30,000 defenders dropped their weapons without a fight. They had heard the rumors, they had seen the terror. When the gates fell, the city's legendary library was reduced to ash, scholars decapitated in the courtyards where they once taught. Knowledge itself was not spared. A chronicler named Majid recorded Genghis Khan's chilling words as he entered the grand temple of Batrak. "I am the wrath of God. Had you not sinned so greatly, he would not have sent me to punish you." Behind his armies was an invisible machine, the Yam, the most sophisticated intelligence network of its time. It stretched thousands of miles, using hidden stations every 25 miles to pass messages faster than any rival power could dream. Merchants, monks, even magicians worked as spies. One of them, a silent astrologer named Yuntar, spent years posing as a mystic to gather secrets from the halls of Western palaces. Venetian explorer Marco Vesso would later describe this web of spies with over 200,000 horses, tens of thousands of men, all working not with swords but with whispers. Fear became spectacle. After taking the fortress city of Veluin, Genghis ordered 24,000 enemy skulls stacked into pyramids outside the gates. Similar scenes haunted the cities of Daskarn and Merak, where an estimated 1.3 million people were slaughtered in total. At Merak, his daughter demanded vengeance for her slain husband. Her wish? The complete extermination of the city, every man, woman, child, even the animals. Her father granted it with chilling calm. The Mongols left warnings behind, like omens. 3 arrows planted upright in the soil meant death would soon rain upon the city. A single broken arrow was mercy for those wise enough to surrender. Sometimes they would send scouts ahead just to paint their horses' bridles with blood, turning them into walking harbingers of doom. Even alliances weren't safe from Genghis Khan's cold logic. The people of Tharnak served the Mongols loyally. For years, yet in 1227, suspecting future rebellion, he had the entire population exterminated. Theirs was a culture wiped from history language, stories, faces gone. The same fate awaited the proud Kellen dynasty. After an uneasy partnership, the Mongols turned on them with ruthless precision. Captured soldiers were forced to write desperate letters to their families. Resistance is death, they wrote just before being executed. The betrayal cut deeper than swords. One Chinese general, Zheng Fang, once a sworn enemy, defected to Genghis's side, trading loyalty for survival. He brought with him the secrets of Kellen's capital, sealing its doom. By 1234, nearly a third of Genghis Khan's commanders were former enemies, proof that even loyalty had a price. The Mongol sword, they said, had 2 edges. One cut down the enemy, the other sliced through trust, alliance, and hope. At the battle of Vastrik River, this deception reached mythical status. General Subalai, Genghis Khan's most lethal tactician, pretended to flee. For 9 days, the enemy chased him across frozen lands, thinking victory was at hand. On the 10th day, they were swallowed whole by the trap. Not a single enemy commander lived to tell the tale. When Bamrut fell in 1221, it wasn't the bloodshed that haunted survivors, it was the silence. Genghis's grandson had been killed by an arrow. In revenge, every living being in the city was ordered killed. The place was renamed Gorin, the city of sorrow. Locals said the earth there refused to grow for 100 years. Persian historian Razan al-Qadir wrote, "Even the stones wept at the desolation. Through flame, fear, and lies, Genghis Khan carved an empire stretching 12 million square miles. His name alone could empty cities. His tactics made him not just a conqueror of lands, but a master of the human mind in Genghis Khan's empire. Punishment wasn't simply retribution, it was design. A system so coldly calculated that it turned fear into policy and cruelty into order. As the philosopher Lao Ji once said, "Force may conquer the body, but fear rules the soul." Genghis Khan built his empire on both. He codified his reign with a brutal legal code known as the Zarin, a law book forged near Lake Vokar around 1206. It listed 36 crimes punishable by death, among them abandoning comrades in battle, urinating in sacred rivers, and preparing food with dirty hands. No offense was too small if it undermined the fabric of his authority. Punishments were not just fatal, they were theatrical. In 1214, 3 soldiers who fled the siege of Balyur were dragged before the army and broken at the waist. Were literally split in half as a warning to all. Desertion would not be tolerated. Even Genghis Khan's most trusted commander, Urbek, once faced death. He had accidentally killed the Khan's horse in battle. Instead of hiding, he confessed, with his head bowed. The Khan spared him, but only because fear paired with loyalty was more valuable than blood. The punishment for betrayal was designed to echo for generations. In 1219, during the campaign against the northern province of Carinth, captured spies were tied to posts in the desert. Honey was poured over their faces, and they were left to die under the blazing sun as insects devoured them alive. One chronicler wrote, "Their screams became prayers that were never heard." As Genghis Khan once declared, "A traitor's death ends. One betrayal land prevents 1,000 more." But death alone wasn't enough. It had to send a message. In 1220, after the fall of the wealthy city of Darhan, the richest merchants, those who had resisted paying tribute, were dragged to the central square. Before a silent crowd, molten silver was poured into their eyes and ears. Their crime? Greed. 3 years later in Samet, a similar fate awaited the elite. This time, the punishment was more lavish molten gold. The wails echoed for 3 days. The city's alleys were slick with blood and ash. In Balrog, the cruelty reached even darker depths. Captured soldiers were strapped to wooden frames and used as human shields. Arrows pierced them from both sides, while their comrades looked on, helpless. A poet from the region, Mahir al-Nazir, later wrote, "Better the silence of tyrants than the mercy of cowards." The system followed a grim rhythm, the 7 steps of destruction. After the city of Navor fell to Genghis Khan's youngest son, the population of 700,000 was methodically dismantled. First, the artisans were pulled out for deportation. Then came the butchery. Women, children, elders divided by age and trade were executed in waves. The soldiers reportedly killed 100,000 people per day. Only 400 survived. One of them, the mathematician Fahim al-Razi, wrote in secret, "Death wore 1,000 faces, and each was worse than the last." Even the faintest whiff of rebellion invited catastrophe. In 1227, near modern-day Yanjing, a small uprising erupted in a subdued province. Genghis Khan ordered the rebels and their families boiled alive in massive bronze cauldrons. Their screams filled the valley. Those who watched would never forget. In Cayenne, an entire neighborhood was slaughtered because one household was caught hiding spears. An official from the Song dynasty wrote in despair, "They created peace by subtracting the living." The Mongol principle of control had a name. 9 exterminations, the annihilation of 9 generations of a family for one person's crime. Guilt wasn't individual. It was contagious. In 1232, in the region of Bamher Valley, a village of 12,000 was buried alive in a single grave. Their only sin? When family had harbored a fugitive, the soil itself trembled for days. Soldiers poured water over the grave to force the ground to settle. Locals began calling it the Valley of Screams. But the most terrifying punishments weren't just in the act. They were in the performance. The Mongols turned executions into events of public theater. In 1229, when the city of Halrid dared to revolt, Genghis Khan's successor, Otagai, dispatched 50,000 troops under General Kharuan. The city endured 6 months of terror. Every brick was removed. Every crop was burned. The great library of Halrid, with over 12,000 volumes, was destroyed, its ashes dumped into the river. When it was over, only 40,000 of the city's original million remained. The educated were forced to eat their own scrolls before they were killed. The Mongols even developed torture as an art form. Victims were wrapped in freshly skinned hides. As the leather dried in the sun, it shrank, slowly crushing the body inside. This method was used on captured officials from the fallen Song Empire. One by one, they were pressed into silence. Other punishments were even more grotesque. Prisoners were tied between two bent saplings. When the trees were released, the body was torn apart in midair. It was called the Green Death. Genghis Khan didn't exempt even his family. In 1208, when his brother Seir was rumored to be plotting betrayal, he was publicly chained, stripped of titles, and paraded before the army. In 1210, the Khan's son Yorick was demoted and humiliated for failing in a campaign. Even more brutal was the fate of his sister Terenji. In 1216, she was accused of harboring spies. The Khan ordered her entire household husband, children, servants executed. The message was clear. No bloodline was sacred. The ceremonies themselves followed sacred steps. Victims had to bow 9 times toward the north, acknowledging the Khan's divine authority. Then came the execution. In 1227, just before his death, Genghis Khan personally oversaw the execution of the entire royal family of the Tangari kingdom. One by one, over 5 days, they were slain in order of rank. Each death was not just punishment, it was performance, prophecy, and propaganda. They called it the steps of death, and it worked. Cities fell without a fight. Walls crumbled at the whisper of his name. And as one chronicler would write, the shadow of Genghis Khan stretched farther than any army because it lived inside the minds of men. Genghis Khan was not just a warlord, he was an architect of annihilation. His genius didn't stop at battlefield formations. It extended to a monstrous synergy of science, suffering, and strategy. Every siege he commanded became a lesson in how to destroy a city, not just physically, but psychologically, spiritually, and environmentally. The Siege of Jiangtul, now modern-day Beijing, became the defining example of Mongol siege brilliance. General Mukar, under direct orders from the Khan, formed a living wall of 50,000 riders around the city, the Ring of Death. Nothing went in, nothing came out. Then the water was poisoned not just with dead livestock but with rotting human corpses. Disease spread faster than arrows, and when food vanished, the city ate itself. The criminals in prison were the first to be devoured. The siege lasted 374 days. When it ended, 60,000 civilians, those who tried to escape, were butchered at the gates. Poet Luo Ming wrote afterward, "The sky bled, the ground smoked. Even the gods refused to look." The assault on Urgarin raised the horror further. Genghis Khan's son, Chagan, ordered the Amur River to be diverted, turning the city into a drowned tomb. Thousands were swallowed by an artificial lake. When the water began to recede, fire rained down next. Trebuchets designed by captured engineer Lin launched barrels of burning oil and resin over the walls. Napalm-like compounds lit everything they touched. The machines could hurl 90-kilogram firebombs over 200 meters. The result was a night so bright with flame it turned dusk into daylight. Historian Al-Nassif described it. The earth became a lake of blood, the sky a sheet of fire. The city burned from the inside out. Out of 1.2 million people, only 50,000 artisans were spared, seen not as survivors, but as property. Among them was the mathematician Raham el-Kazi, who wrote, "They brought geometry to genocide." At Nashabar, the Mongols refined their new doctrine, the counting of death. After the city's fall in 1221, Commander Turin divided the population of 1.7 million into groups of 10. Each cluster was assigned a Mongol executioner. 9 were slaughtered. 1 was spared, but only to spread the story. The survivors had a mission: to walk, to talk, and to terrify. Execution wasn't just precise. It was documented like trade. Mongol officers carried colored threads, red for civilians, black for soldiers. After the massacre, they cut off an ear from every corpse. 1.3 million ears were gathered, counted, sorted, and sent to surrounding cities as a warning. "Let no one say this was rumor," said Genghis Khan's secretary Yelu Shirak. "Speak louder than screams." This tactic was known as the arithmetic of fear. But fear alone didn't feed the horses. The Mongols employed economic extermination as policy. During the campaign against the Tavari Empire, General Jebin targeted irrigation canals, salt mines, and silk factories. He carried a 3-volume manual called the Book of Unmaking, a step-by-step guide to annihilate infrastructure. In the city of Genzun, they poisoned wells not just with corpses, but with molten bronze. Salt fields were drowned in blood. The artisans who held secrets like how to dye imperial yellow silk were executed with their hands severed first. They didn't just destroy wealth. They murdered knowledge. Evidence unearthed at the site revealed a shocking level of precision. Destroyed aqueducts were filled with lead to prevent rebuilding. Fields were salted, trade roads mapped and then severed. When the Mongols stormed Kayang, they unveiled their deadliest new weapon, the heaven-shaking thunderbomb. Developed by Muslim engineers, these early grenades were packed with shrapnel and gunpowder. Their impact blew open walls. The sound shattered minds. A Song dynasty general named Lo Jianyi described it. "When the bombs exploded, even the mountains trembled. The gods of war fell silent. To make sure no soul forgot, Mongol catapults hurled the most unspeakable weapons children. Captured, dismembered, yet still alive, they were launched back into their cities. It was not just warfare, it was trauma engineered into action. Even sound became a weapon. At Volin, they used ghost arrows, specially crafted shafts with hollow bone chambers that whistled and screamed as they flew. These sounds created mass hysteria. Soldiers fled before the first wave of the assault. Archaeologists discovered some of these arrows in 2018, still intact. Each one a perfectly designed tool of psychological warfare. Sound, sight, smell, fire, flood. Genghis Khan controlled the senses like a puppeteer. Their doctrine was clarif. A city resisted. It died 1,000 deaths. If it surrendered, it lived only to remember. Every method was systematized. Every death accounted for. Every wall torn down with exactitude. And when Mongol soldiers cut off ears for their counts, they weren't just tallying corpses. They were sending math as a message. This was not an army of chaos. It was an empire of calculated devastation. To Genghis Khan, victory wasn't complete. Until the elite were humiliated, the bloodline shattered, and the myth of nobility burned to ash. For him, aristocracy was a structure to be dismantled brick by brick. With the precision of a surgeon and the cruelty of a god, his enemies called him the Butcher of Thrones. His own commanders called him the Scourge of Sovereigns. When the ruler of the Kharashid Empire, Shah Malik II, fled into exile rather than face the wrath of the Khan, Genghis launched what became known as the Great Hunt, a 9-month pursuit across rivers, deserts, and mountains. 20,000 elite horsemen followed a single man. When the Shah finally died of disease on a remote island in the Caspian Sea, the Khan's response was cold. "I would have made him my gatekeeper, so the world could watch a king open my door." But the humiliation didn't stop at death. The fall of Jianlu. Modern-day Beijing. Genghis Khan's commanders carried detailed scrolls. listing every noble family in the imperial court. One by one, 2,000 high-ranking officials were executed in descending order of rank. Those with royal blood weren't granted mercy. Instead, they were suffocated beneath layers of felt, a noble death designed to avoid spilling royal blood. The others were beheaded in public. The Emperor Xuanzong was forced to watch it, a leech advisor, each cousin, each general, cut down like cattle, and then came the rituals. During the submission of the Tangari king, the defeated monarch was made to perform the 9 crawls, a public ceremony in which he had to crawl 9 times in a circle before Genghis Khan's horse, his forehead scraping the dirt. Crawl, the royal court was ordered to spit on their former emperor. Unchronicles record that this ritual wasn't about death. It was about erasing the very concept of kingship. Genghis Khan didn't just kill rulers, he redesigned them. At the fall of Bukhan, 7 members of the city's noble council were spared. Not as survivors, but as messengers of terror. Were dressed in royal robes, given fine horses, and sent in 7 directions to tell the story of the fall. One of them, quoted by Arab historian Al-Nari, said, "They made me watch every death, remember every scream, and now I ride only to repeat the nightmare." The chain of blood became Mongol policy. After conquering the Uruz kingdom, Genghis forced 27 noble families to hand over their eldest daughters to serve as wives to Mongol officers. The sons were taken as hostages and trained in Mongol camps. Historian Mahmud al-Arashi wrote, "They bound us with blood stronger than steel." By 1220. Over 40% of Mongol generals had noble hostages as their personal servants in the Juyuan province. Nobles were systematically divided into 3 groups. 1 to be executed, 1 sent to Mongolia as hostages, and 1 forced to remain in their cities as puppet administrators. This 3-fate system ensured that no noble family retained its power, unity, or identity. Chinese official Wei Zun said it best. They butchered families like butchers slice lambs, 1 part for the table, 1 for the chain, 1 for the spectacle. In Georgia, the psychological manipulation escalated into theater. Captured noble families were forced into the game of kingdoms. Twisted competition where aristocrats were made to perform degrading tasks, scrubbing floors, feeding horses, carrying dung. The losers were executed. The winners forced to carry out the executions themselves. Georgian chronicler Basilius wrote, "They turned kings into jesters, into judges of kings." When the Mongols returned in 1236, several noble houses in Georgia fought with them against their own people. Symbolic degradation became the new battlefield. In the Qatari lands, nobles were stripped of their ceremonial robes, then made to clean horse stables while wearing the same garments backward. Their family seals were melted down and recast as horse bits. Their royal swords were used to roast meat over open fires. Qatari historian Li Changsun wrote, "They did not just destroy nobility, they made nobility serve lunch." Archaeological findings confirm the horror. Broken insignias, royal stamps recast into crude tools, noble robes found buried in waste pits, but nothing compared to the 7 steps of noble death, ritual executed during the campaign against the Song Empire. First, captured lords were stripped and dressed in peasant rags. Second, their hair was shaved in the Mongol style. Third, their faces were marked with black ash. Fourth, their ancestral tablets were burned. Fifth, their family records were shredded. Sixth, their ceremonial weapons were melted down. And seventh, they were executed by common foot soldiers, not even worthy of a warrior's blade. Song chronicler Jiao Guan wrote, "Each step didn't just kill the body, it murdered centuries of power. The Kharashid aristocracy suffered a fate worse than execution. Their servants were elevated to guard positions while they were forced to scrub their own palaces now, ruled by their former stable boys." One nobleman etched into a prison wall, "I once commanded thousands. Now I bow to the man who shined my boots." Even religion was not spared. In the campaign against the Buddhist kingdoms of the West, Mongol generals ordered high-ranking monks to bless war horses. They were forced to do it wearing their sacred robes backward while chanting scripture in reverse. Tibetan scholar Chopal Nam Gil recorded that over 300 monks were forced to carry Mongol supplies in their ceremonial hats. Some monasteries chose to burn their own sacred texts rather than see them desecrated. And what of the royal children? Young princes and princesses were captured, taken to Mongol lands, and raised as foreigners. They were fed new languages, new loyalties, and new gods. When they were old enough, they were sent back to govern the lands they once would have inherited. Armenian chronicler Kyriakos of Ganzak wrote of one young noble. He returned with a Mongol tongue, wearing Mongol clothes, loyal not to blood, but to the Khan. This was how Genghis Khan conquered without fighting. He didn't just defeat kings, he unmade them, erased their lines, rewrote their legacy, built a world where even the whisper of noble pride was answered with silence. By the time Genghis Khan's armies reached the western rim of the known world, resistance had already begun to collapse, not because of force, but because of memory. The stories moved faster than his cavalry. Rumors burned brighter than his torches. In many cities, the battle was lost before the first Mongol banner appeared on the horizon. It was no accident. Every massacre, every ritual death, every humiliation was part of a larger machine, psychological warfare engineered to span generations. During the siege of Valir, Genghis Khan ordered the construction of a massive wooden execution platform. Large enough to hold 100 prisoners at once, was built in full view of the city's defenders. Prisoners were brought up in waves, executed methodically. The next group was forced to clean the blood before their own turn. Arab historian Ibn Nafis wrote, "Men went mad. Women threw their children from the walls rather than let them fall into Mongol hands. They called it the stage of judgment, and they left it standing for decades. A monument not of glory, but of terror." The execution system was so complex, it required its own military corps. A unit known as the Taraki, numbering nearly 1,000, traveled with the main army. They wore black leather armor, painted their faces crimson, and were trained in execution logistics and torture methods. During the 1223 campaign in the northern plains, they built wooden platforms that collapsed underfoot, crushing hundreds of people at once. The chronicles of Novgorod recorded they were demons in human skin. Their faces alone stopped hearts. Genghis Khan created what modern historians now call peace through terror. Cities surrendered without a fight. Entire populations submitted at the mere sound of Mongol horses. In 1231, the kingdom of Karjan laid down arms after receiving a single package, a scroll detailing the fall of 3 cities and a small bag of dried ears. Arab geographer Jakut al-Hamawi wrote, "They ruled not by love, but by the cold arithmetic of fear." During the invasion of Hungary, entire regions were evacuated simply because a merchant whispered that the Mongols were approaching. In Poland, towns were set ablaze by their own citizens. They preferred to burn their homes rather than offer them to Genghis Khan. The Mongol tactic worked too well. Even a rumor of their arrival caused cities to empty, armies to scatter, and kings to beg. It led to a historical era later called the traumatic Pax Mongolica, a peace, but one that lived in shadows. In 2019, archaeologists uncovered mass graves near the ruins of Old Kalgar. Bodies were arranged in concentric circles there, skulls crushed ritualistically, mirroring ancient descriptions of Mongol ceremonial execution. Other sites across Central Asia revealed bones with precise slicing patterns, supporting accounts of organized and ritualistic torture. The Mongols didn't just erase lives, they erased identities, cultures, languages during the siege of Baragan. Their assault wasn't aimed at soldiers, but at memory. Monks were forced to recite sacred texts backward before being slaughtered. Children's toys were soaked in blood and thrown into cities as warnings. Banners of cities they had destroyed were sent to new targets, each one a death certificate. In advance, historian David Morgan called this the doctrine of horror campaigns, so meticulously designed. It weaponized legacy itself, and yet it wasn't just terror that Genghis Khan mastered. He understood propaganda. Survivors were given gifts, fine robes, strong horses, just one task to ride into the next city and speak, "This is what happens when you resist." Even mothers turned his name into lullabies. In the lands he never reached, women would hush their crying children with whispers, "Be still, or Genghis Khan will come." In time, his army stopped needing to kill. His enemies did it for them. The Mongol psychological machine left no stone unshaken. From ghost arrows that screamed through the sky to fire dragon bombs that lit the night like a second sun. From murdered monks, blessing horses, to noble children raised to rule their own people with a Mongol accent. Every act was a masterpiece of trauma, and in every city he passed through, Genghis Khan carved the same message not into monuments but into minds. I do not need to conquer your body, only your belief that you were ever safe. He died in 1227, but the horror didn't die with him. It rode on the wind, in the whispers, in the ashes, in the silence after the screams, and for generations. The world didn't ask if the Mongols would return, they asked when.